Each year, millions of adults in the U.S. are diagnosed with vascular disease, and it's no wonder. With over 60,000 miles of intricate arteries and veins throughout the human body, there are bound to be complications due to blockages, weakening of the blood vessel wall, and other issues impacting the circulatory system. With an aging population and the growing incidence of risk factors such as diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, smoking, and the disproportionate incidence of vascular disease in our minority populations, the management of vascular health is becoming a key focus among today's healthcare leaders and providers. As with any medical disease or condition, it takes an entire team of dedicated professionals to find new ways to efficiently diagnose and treat patients, as well as to improve their long-term care. In vascular health, the leader of the team is today's vascular surgeon. Only vascular surgeons dedicate their entire training and practice to address the full spectrum of vascular health, as well as provide comprehensive care that includes preventive, medical, surgical, and minimally invasive solutions. Through ongoing education and research, as well as pioneering new techniques, vascular surgeons are on the leading edge of clinical breakthroughs that are transforming vascular health. As part of their comprehensive approach, vascular surgeons partner with other healthcare professionals to provide quality care tailored to each patient. This patient-centered model is vital to help all physicians manage vascular health in at-risk populations and promote healthier lifestyles in the future. Vascular surgeons are involved in every part of the disease process, from making the diagnosis to the management of disease. Vascular surgeons are comprehensive leaders in vascular health. Today's vascular surgeons are creating a new chapter in the vascular health story with improved patient care, better outcomes, collaboration, and leadership. Surgery is only part of our story.
Hello, my name is Dr. Alan Lumsden. I'm the medical director here at the Houston Methodist DeBakey Heart Vascular Center. It's a real privilege for us to be able to host the second SVS Town Hall, which is going to be moderated by myself and the President, Kim Hodgson. Before I hand it off to Kim, let me just make a couple of announcements, and that is, it's very important to us to hear feedback from you, the audience. And this can be done either online or by text message. By text message, if you type 37607, that's the number, 37607, and type in DeBakey, you'll be able to ask questions of the panelists and also respond to some of the multi-choice questionnaires. You can also do this online. It gives you a little bit more functionality for some of the questions, and it's pollev, pollev.com/DeBakey. We will be running some captions which will remind you of how to do this during the course of this presentation. And with that, let me hand this over to Dr. Hodgson, who's in Southern Illinois, who's going to moderate the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. I've just shared my screen. I think you can probably all see that. So thank you, Dr. Lumsden, and welcome to all of our returning and first-time viewers to the second in our series of SVS Town Halls on COVID-19. I'll be co-moderating today with Dr. Alan Lumsden, who's professor and chairman of cardiovascular surgery at Houston Methodist Hospital. Houston Methodist is not only sharing Alan with us today, but also their video production facilities, which are making this transmission possible. We greatly appreciate their generous contributions to this effort. Before I introduce today's panelists, let me recap for a moment our first SVS Town Hall from last week, which was focused on the practice implications of the COVID-19 pandemic and has over 1,000 views. I think that the take-home message from that panel was that we should only be performing true life or limb-saving procedures, and even then only in patients expected to have good outcomes. This is not only to minimize the risk of virus transmission, but also to conserve limited personal protective equipment. And as a reminder, SVS Connect and the SVS websites are the places to go to for the most up-to-date information, such as these case priority algorithms. While early versions may have been posted on other sites, the SVS website is the only place we are keeping these current and updated. Another interesting concept that came out of last week was that of the OBL being a relatively safe outlet for patients in need of dialysis access maintenance or limb salvage interventions while the hospitals struggle with COVID-19. There's been enough interest expressed in this that we may explore it further in a future SVS Town Hall. At the end of our first town hall, we did a rank order poll of topics of interest for future SVS town halls, and to reiterate, here are those results. With this kind of feedback and by following posts on SVS Connect, we have a number of SVS town halls either scheduled or in development. As everyone understands, COVID-19 is causing rapid changes to the world in which we live and work. For many of our members, the potential for significant financial hardship is real, particularly in the private practice arena. Given the recent passage of legislation by Congress that offers some relief to these impacted practices, but is also very time sensitive, we've made the decision to prioritize our planned town hall on financial assistance programs for practices impacted by C-19 and offer it next Friday, April 10th. To accommodate this change, we'll be moving our two previously announced town halls on telemedicine platforms and vascular lab issues back 1 week each. Apologies to any members or panelists affected by these changes. So after today, our next SVS Town Hall, co-moderated by Dan McDevitt, Chair of the SVS Community Practice Council, is on Friday, April 10th, and is devoted to financial assistance programs for practices impacted by C-19. As you can see, we've assembled a panel of SVS leaders well-versed in these issues, including Dan himself, Jill Rathbun, the SVS Government Relations Consultant, Russell Sampson, Bill Schutz, and Megan Tracy. The following Friday, April 17th, we will return to our focus on telemedicine platforms and their use in the COVID-19 era, co-moderated by Judith Lynn, the chairman of the SVS Health Information Technology Committee. Judith has assembled an outstanding group of SVS members well-versed in these issues, including Oliver Alami, Huey Fisher, Misty Humphreys, and Bill Schutz. The following week, on Friday, April 24th, we'll be joined by David Dawson of the Society for Vascular Ultrasound and a panel of experts yet to be determined to help us with guidelines for the safe operation of vascular labs during the COVID-19 outbreak. Other SVS town halls in development, but not yet scheduled, include maintaining the dialysis lifeline during the COVID-19 period, co-moderated with Karen Wu. Legal aspects of managing patients during COVID-19, co-moderated with Bill Brown. I think we're actually going to have some lawyers on that one, which will make it kind of interesting. How is industry going to restart clinical support after COVID? Co-moderated with Marty Sylvain, who used to be with Gore. I think Marty's well known to the vascular community. And then the last one we're working on right now is putting the new SVS branding toolkit to use, and that's going to be co-moderated with Joe Mills. So we have a lot in store, but we're always open to doing more. So just let us know your topics of interest, ideally on SVS. For our second SVS Town Hall today, we're joined by 4 panelists with distinct insight into navigating the education, training, and wellness challenges posed by COVID-19. Rabih Sher is Professor of Surgery and Residency and Fellowship Program Director at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and also serves as Chair of the SVS Education Council. Dawn Coleman is Associate Professor of Surgery and, interestingly, Pediatrics and Communicable Disease, as well as Program Director for the Vascular Residency and Fellowship Programs at the University of Michigan. Dawn has been a driving force behind the SVS Wellness Task Force, now Committee, and also serves on the Education Committee. Amy Reed is Professor-in-Chief of the Division of Vascular Surgery at the University of Minnesota, Secretary of the Society for Vascular Surgery, and current President of the Association of Program Directors in Vascular Surgery. And lastly, Gib Upchurch is the Edward Woodward Professor and Chairman of Surgery at the University of Florida, and is also Chairman of the Vascular Surgery Board. So we have panelists knowledgeable about all the facets of vascular surgical education and training, as well as insight into keeping our sanity through these challenging times. I encourage you to make use of text-to-questions options you'll see detailed periodically on your screen, or as Dr. Lumsden just went over with you, so that you can pick their brains fully. Dr. Lumsden will be sorting through those text questions as they come in and interjecting some of those questions into our discussion here today. So I'm going to go ahead and give my screen back and ask our first panelist, and that will be Amy Reed, to share with us some of the prepared material she has about COVID-19 and its impact on resident and fellow training. Amy?
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to give some updates on training during this pandemic time. And I want to first start with some actual, let's see if I can move my, if I can advance my slides here. Oh, here we go.
You may have, yeah.
Yeah. I want to share actually some good news. There's times where, there's been a lot of doom and gloom, but I've lost in the last month with the pandemic was our match day for our 05 integrated students who matched. Was 2 Fridays ago. And I'm pleased to say that we filled 97% of our positions. 73 of 75 slots in the country were filled. 81% of these slots were filled by our US senior medical students. Only one program did not match. And this has been reasonably consistent with the last several years when we looked at this. I also want to call attention to the outstanding work across the country over the last just 4 years. 19 positions have been created for integrated residency slots. And so I think that speaks to a lot of work that people are doing in education. And so I'm really excited to see these residents coming in during an incredibly difficult and unprecedented time. Our fellowship match is coming up. The rank order list is due later this month on April 29th. And May 15th is our fellow match day, which I imagine will also certainly be a virtual experience. One of the things that's come out of the pandemic and in the last month, we started encouraging programs who still had to interview applicants for vascular surgery fellowship to proceed with that in a virtual fashion. And I'm pleased to say that the feedback from program directors and program coordinators has been really quite positive for this. Many of you in education and in the program directors for vascular surgery know that we've been speaking about this for years. I would say at least over the last 5 to 10 years, we've been trying to figure out a way of how we might regionalize interviewing, which we've done with some success, but ways that we can try to minimize the time impact and most importantly, the travel and the cost. And I would say that the necessity here, which has forced us to really come away with doing virtual interviewing, I think has put this out in a positive light. And I think this is something certainly going forward as we look to our current interviews and then interviewing medical students this fall for integrated. I think virtual interviewing is going to be something appreciated by not only program directors, but the interviewees who are going to be having to pay and to travel. So I look for this to be a real positive. So how about our training? What's going on locally here in Minneapolis and around the country? And certainly, first and foremost is the safety of our trainees and certainly of our faculty. And I'm sure most everyone has gone to some type of virtual rounding. We tried here to minimize the amount of time, or even does the fellow or trainee have to go into the hospital? We, like many of you on the call, are stay at home and really to only leave for essential, for us, emergent or urgent types of things. So we try to encourage all of the rounding to be as virtual, and even consultation has been eased, as you know, from CMS this week. Billing and things are eased that you can view things remotely in imaging and staff things that way. So we also try in our rotations, we have 2 fellows per year. We have them actually staying at their specific assignments and have not rotated them as of yet. We're not due to rotate, but even for our call, we very much focus them to not really kind of have them go to multiple different hospitals. The virtual education arena has really been active and prominent for years. And I think for programs that weren't using virtual education before the pandemic, they certainly are forced to now and have stepped up well. Grand rounds, as most of you have experienced having that virtually. We've done that for a number of years, primarily to respect people's travel for outreach and in different parts of the area for seeing patients, so that they can join whether on an iPhone or a computer. Our educational conferences, we also do those via Zoom, and so we have people looking at those from many different aspects, at least around our city, and we've been doing that for 2 years. We also have done a virtual M&M, and those are able to be done through our Zoom, which is through our institution and HIPAA protected. Certainly anything you can imagine, case conferences, reviewing, doing a mock orals, doing VSAP, question reviews, all of that is easily amenable to virtual education. So none of that should be really stopping from our trainees' standpoint. Cases, Gib will speak to this and the numbers. I encourage everyone to recall and remember that as a program director, the ACGME looks at cases as really a surrogate or a marker is when they go to accredit programs and allow you to become a training program, they look to see, do you have the volume? Everybody realizes right now that cases are down. And so when program directors get to a point of within a short period of time, end of June, when they're going to actually write the line and say that their trainee is competent to perform procedures independently, recall that doesn't mean, boy, did they do enough EVARs? Did they do enough carotid endarterectomies? If they are competent, even if they didn't say they were a case or two short in an area, that doesn't mean that you can't sign off on them as a competent person and a competent trainee. To speak to a bit, and there's been a lot of discussion about this, and certainly we've been impacted here, is providing care beyond vascular surgery. And I speak to this both from faculty and from trainees. From a faculty standpoint, I'm sure most all of you have been asked to say, what else can you do besides vascular surgery? If you're critical care boarded, or can you staff an ICU and be an attending for a period of time? Many of us have put our names in to be available for that, should that come into play. For fellows and trainees, you probably, if you have not been asked by your institution and your Department of Surgery and GME office, you likely will be. We've essentially taken the stance that our fellows are really the last in line for this. And I think when you look at it, when the Department of Surgery has exhausted their general surgery residents and their trainees for that, if the vascular surgery fellow is at the end of the line and needs to be used even when they get through the entire line, then that may be a possibility. The way we staff it here, we only have one faculty and one fellow per hospital, so that we're not, at least for our call and urgent and emergent procedures. So our fellow is essential. We can't give the fellow up to safely be available for emergency and urgent cases. So I think if you have to put your fellow out there as a person who could switch over to a different care and provide care beyond vascular surgery, say in the intensive care unit, I would urge you to consider that they be kind of last in line. The integrated, this may not be the same scenario with the integrated residents, unless it's perhaps your fifth year resident. I think for program directors, obviously you're going to continue to advocate for your trainees as you always do. And that's where I would again encourage, like many of you have suggested and continue to do so on SBS Connect, that you advocate for your fellow to remain the essential person that you need on your service. We've certainly advocated during this time scholarly activity, working on QI projects, reviewing for the RPVI. As you probably know, obviously the trainees can't go to the Pearson Testing Center and sit for the RPVI, but I'm sure it'll be helpful to talk to Dr. Dawson when he's on in a couple of weeks on the town hall to see what they're going to do for that. Recall that the RPVI does not need to be taken or passed to sit for the QE exam. It needs to be for the CE. So I think don't need to worry about that, but it's a good time to study. The case numbers, as I mentioned, is certainly not a determinant of competency. So again, bear that in mind for your trainees that are about to graduate. With regard to where things are and what we're going to be doing going forward from training and virtual training, the APDVS meeting, we canceled that in March, and we've set that up as a virtual APDVS meeting to be 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Central Time, Monday, May 4th. We have program directors now around the country recording some of their didactic sessions, so I would encourage any of you training vascular residents or fellows, if you've got a good educational presentation that you're currently doing on Zoom, just hit record and save that. V-Score is going to be coming online the end of this summer, and the editorial board of V-Score we're hoping to kind of put some of these videos and really kind of put it all together as a one-stop shop for our curriculum, and be able to push those out as well. So there'll be more information about that at our APDBS meeting. And I would encourage all of you, if you're not members already, to be part of the SVS Connect for program directors. It's specific. If you're a program director, when you try to sign up for SVS Connect and ask for that designation, they will put you in that group, and it is only program directors. So there's information that gets posted on there for any types of updates and things you might need. That's all I have. Look forward to questions. There we go.
All right. Thank you very much, Amy. Sorry for that brief pause. You commented a minute ago about last in line, and I think that's an interesting and also an appropriate designation for vascular fellows. But the interesting thing to me is that more or less the hospitals kind of own the residents and fellows, don't they? Because they pay their salaries. So was this a hard fight to win, or how did that go?
No, I think, that's not a position we usually put ourselves in as last in line by any means, but I think it's a rational conversation to have. And I think just in discussion with your general surgery program director, they all kind of get this. When we look at our service, already our surgical residents were pulled from our service, and we said, okay, fine, you're just going to leave us with the fellow and the faculty. And I think everyone understands that. We can't have an APP, we have a ruptured aneurysm come in, we can't be functioning just with an APP and a faculty. And so I think there's common sense that comes into that. And I think the conversations have been fine with that.
Interestingly, I heard Dr. Lumsden say yesterday on a different webinar that his residents are actually being asked now to be scribes in the ICU for the intensivist. Alan, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, probably as testimony to the magnitude of the problem at the moment. Essentially, the night before last, there was from our GME office, they asked for volunteers. They needed 8 volunteers from the variety of different programs to be scribes for the ID people, actually, the infectious disease consultants. And that was kind of put out generically. Interesting, you got to take your hat off. The plastic surgery residents here were the first 2 to volunteer. Wasn't a very popular thing, and to be honest with you, it was more a last minute need, who actually is familiar with Epic, who can type, and the residents were kind of identified as could fill that in short order with a view to how do we actually figure out how we do this course over the course of the next week, because we have a number of people in the labor pool, not including the residents, who probably can be brought up to speed, but it was kind of felt there was an urgent situation, and the group of people who could actually step into that were the residents because of their capabilities. We've not really needed near as many as we thought, but that was the first example of one of our trainees being asked to do something that was not specifically vascular related.
What have others seen in their institutions? Have you had calls on your residents or fellows yet?
I can speak to that, at least at the University of Michigan. We're a bit in the thick of it here, and at a departmental level now, we're looking at both resident, faculty, and APP redeployment in a way where we're serving alongside each other. And so as our hospital really prepares for a full surge of COVID care, while the vascular emergencies are still continuing to come in, and to be honest, we've been busier than ever, there is a pressing need at a hospital level to use our workforce to its fullest capacity. So we've been navigating issues of resident redeployment and where they're going to be strongestly suited. And for some of our trainees, that may be in the critical care units. And so we have surgical residents kind of standing side by side with the faculty, staffing these pop-up ICUs. We also have individuals with these COVID-related concerns for high risk or vulnerable families at home, and we're really looking for guidance on how to use them most effectively. And I love this idea of serving as a scribe, and there are some other ways we're trying to bring our medical students and these higher risk individuals into telemedicine and places like that.
So Gib, as a department chair, you oversee a number of divisions. I'm not sure all that are in your department. I would imagine you're not going to send your orthopedic surgeon residents to do anything. But how are you managing this with all the variety of residencies that you oversee?
Yeah, we cohorted our residents about 10 days ago, as well as our fellows. And I agree with Amy that the vascular fellow, the cardiothoracic fellows, and the plastic surgery fellows, et cetera, have a skill set that are best served typically on their own service. I think, as Amy was suggesting, a fellow and an attending can almost take on any challenge, and that's sort of what we've done. I think there will come a time, if you're in New York or Los Angeles, where we all become critical care doctors, but for now, the fellows are preserved and on their service.
Kim, if I can comment on that, because that's what we had done. The slight problem with that is, it seems like a great idea to protect our service, but when bodies are needed, all of a sudden they look to the surgery services and go, we're not doing any surgery. You got half your residency program sitting at home. Oh, by the way, we need them. So there's a double-edged sword. I understand the rationale, but they're kind of easy pickings in terms of being able to be pulled in to fulfill other duties.
Yeah, I think vascular surgeons are acute care surgeons. I mean, we, just limiting we get 3 to 10 transfers in every day. And it's still dead bowel and dead legs and ruptured aneurysms. And so we have to have some workforce to take care. I mean, vascular surgeons are acute care surgeons. Depending on where you are, anywhere from 30 to 50% of what you do is actually acute vascular care. So I agree with Alan that we're all ultimately going to become critical care doctors. A line service is what we can be very good at, putting lines in, chest tubes, bronching, but we still are going to be hit with vascular emergencies. Even in Italy, my friends tell me that this COVID-19 presents with a vasculitis. He's managing lots of embolic and thrombotic complications of the lower extremities in particular.
That's a sobering thought. Well, we're going to touch on a lot of these other aspects too. We'll come back to that unless anybody else had something to chime in right now. Why don't we actually move on to Gib, since you're all warmed up and everything there. Gib is chairman of the Vascular Surgery Board and is going to talk to us a little bit about some things that are going on there to help us all get through these times.
Thanks, Kim. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to fix the display settings so I can. Great. I think one of the first things I wanted to open up with is, as you know, my time as the chair of the vascular board, people know that I'm all about being as open as possible. And I think during this time of the COVID crisis, that will continue to be true. And what you'll see in a couple of slides here is that the Vascular Surgery Board is going to show really never before seen flexibility. We have already, this will come out from the Vascular Surgery Board, hopefully. This was agreed upon by everybody on the Vascular Surgery Board on 3/27. But the typical requirements for a vascular surgery fellow in particular are 48 weeks, or as a resident, as a chief resident, we're going to decrease those time and requirements to 44 weeks. Similarly, typically as a chief resident or as a fellow, you're required to do 250 cases. That's going to decrease to 225 cases. I want to just re-emphasize that in addition, you are going to be able to use time, just like Dr. Reed said, off-site with interpretation of vascular labs, telemedicine clinics, clinical case discussions as time in service. So one of the things that I think that's really important is to recognize that we're going to show incredible flexibility in making sure that everybody is able to sit for their boards. And we're completely dedicated to this. One of the things that Amy also mentioned is that what's really important is that the trainees and the program directors sort of assess what their needs are. And if they have cases, et cetera, going forward where they have some gaps, they should focus on that with their program director. We are going to make an exception even if people fall below the 90% mark or the 44 weeks. And these are some other areas. You can look at your milestones where we'll take into account your V-site scores. We'll take into account leadership or time spent on other services. So the Vascular Surgery Board is going to be absolutely as flexible as possible, making sure that this time of crisis does not cost our trainees, because we need more vascular surgeons board certified rather than fewer. I know that people were really upset. They probably had done a fair amount of studying. The CE, and I know this was one of your questions, Kim, we will plan for doing the CE if all goes according to the predictions, probably in late summer of 2020, likely in August. That time is flexible. I don't want anybody holding me to it. The new lifelong learning, which was really rolled out last year, 40 question tests, MOC, this was all done on your laptop at home or your computer. This will go on as planned. And so there shouldn't be any delay in lifelong learning. I know people are worried about the QE exam. Amy mentioned this in the fall of 2020. We have not made any decisions about that. And obviously we'll do this in a timely fashion once this pandemic is over. Another key about this is these are not permanent changes going forward. I would say that last year, of the roughly 175 people that sat for the boards, there was only one person where there was any question about whether they would qualify for the boards or not. So the key for this, for our trainees and all the anxiety associated with that, is that we want you to be a board certified vascular surgeon. We will be as flexible as possible. Use your time wisely. Do many of the things that Amy, Dr. Reed suggested. And with that, I am going to go back and share my screen and happy to answer any questions.
All right, great, Gib. Alan's going to go set up some text to screen questions, but while he's doing that, I have a quick one for you.
Sure.
We're doing all this stuff virtually now. Would you consider doing the certifying examination virtually?
So it's interesting. The pediatric surgeons have already experimented with it. And I would say one of the areas, and Rabih knows this because he's on the vascular surgery board, is that vascular surgeons lead in is the use of technology in doing the certifying exam. And so I think that there is no doubt that given the explosion of telemedicine and the ability to actually make that secure, there's no doubt that we're exploring those sorts of options. So
what about the qualifying exam?
Doing it from your home computer?
Yep.
I think we're going to learn a lot of lessons going forward, and I don't want to speak for the entire VSB, but I would say that flexibility is key, and the new normal might include both a QE and a CE via telemedicine.
All right, great. Alan, you got some text to screen questions for us?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Thanks, Gib. Okay, first question is, will reductions in elective volume with COVID-19 have an impact on accreditation of new integrated vascular programs or the new program application process? Or will those applying be given consideration based upon historical volumes or anticipated high volumes once the pandemic passes? I'll let you decide who gets that one, Kim.
Well, why don't we bounce it first to Amy?
So I think you have to remember this is an ACGME question, and I can tell you, just as my husband's on the ACGME, I'm not going to divulge their secrets, but I will say that the ACGME, just like the Vascular Surgery Board, has very much relaxed what they're doing. We didn't really go into it much, but if you know, the ACGME is not conducting site visits right now. There's a lot of relaxation on that. So as far as the surgery RRC is not meeting in April when it should normally be meeting, I would encourage anyone who's looking at applying for a new program to go to the ACGME website and look to see when the agenda due dates are. If those, I suspect their meetings, the RRC surgery meetings, will be adjusted. They have not gone to virtual meetings for program approval, but that could come up. So I would suggest if, staying tuned for that. And I'm sure to the question about volume, there's going to be some considerations taken into account, of course, and looking at, historical volumes and time periods where you had the volume there to submit for the program. So all those things are being considered, and the flexibility is there. We may not have thought of the ACGME as being a very flexible organization, but I think if you go check out what's going on, there is a lot of flexibility because we don't know where it's going to go. So I think you'll see that flexibility in the meetings and in the applications.
Do you have anything to add to that? I know it is mostly an RRC issue, but.
Yeah, I would just agree with Amy. I think, I feel like the bar is sort of low already. 250 cases over 2 or 5 years is sort of low. And so, taking that down to 225 cases, we do have to assure that the trainees are safe. I mean, that's the goal of the Vascular Surgery Board. That is safe to practice and safe. But we're going to allow for flexibility. These are extraordinary times, and I think both the thing that I love about what's going on now in vascular surgery education is that we have incredibly good relationships with Amy Reed and the program directors and the RRC and Don Coleman and Rabih Chair. We're all here just to focus on the training of the residents. So I think that I'm just going to echo what Amy said. We're all going to be flexible.
Kim, I would just add one thing is that certainly if a program is going to put a new application forward, probably the biggest thing to think about is the finances, and that the GME money and where that's going to go is probably a bigger thing to really ensure where that's going to go in the future for a new program being considered.
Kim, I want to add one other thing. The really important piece of this is not a number. Obviously, we have to, but the really important piece is the letter that we get signed by the program director, and that basically attests to the quality of the trainee. And we've always put a lot of emphasis on that, and I think that will be even more emphasized going forward. And it's right now, especially when you're not so clinically busy, would be a great time for the program director and the trainees to touch base and to focus on areas that they can be actually improved upon. I think that letter coming from the program directors is going to be even more important now more than ever.
Don, Rabih, have anything to add to that?
I would agree with Amy and Gib that flexibility is really what the accrediting bodies have shown, and I wouldn't be surprised that it would continue to be so.
All right, Alan, you got anything else for us?
Yeah, so let me ask Gib a question. So is 225 a hard number?
No. I mean, you've got to have standards, but I would say if you look in the document that we're going to send out, we use 225, but if somebody has less than 225, we're going to have a discussion with the trainee and the program director of that particular trainee. And we're going to do everything we can to get the person board certified.
Okay, the next question that came up. I hope somebody's read Mark's comments because I have not seen this. So hope Mark was behaving himself. But the question is, many in the audience have seen Dr. Mado's comments on SVS Connect. Would be interested to hear comments from the panel related to his post.
Yeah, I think we already addressed that. Dr. Mados had questions about the deployment off service of residents, which we addressed as the kind of the last in line. And perhaps the person didn't hear that, but we've suggested that the vascular fellows really be the last in line to be chosen for doing off-service work, and in asking that the program director in general surgery utilize the surgery residents first, and kind of go for that. I think advocating, as we said, for the safety of your resident and advocating that the rotations, they stay at one particular hospital, how their coverage goes, that they're not maybe cross-covering a lot of hospitals. all those sorts of things. And I think the gist of what I recall from Dr. Maddow's post was a lot of that. Certainly it can be more discussion at the APDVS virtual meeting, but a lot of the post was about keeping the trainees safe and advocating for their remaining on the vascular service, which again, each place is going to be different as to what the needs are, as everybody has stated.
So Amy, this obviously is an institutional decision. Has the program directors group thought about putting out any guidelines or suggested statements about this?
That's a great idea. We could certainly do that. I think we as again, it depends truly on how your system is impacted by this. As we know around the country, New York is different than Milwaukee, than Miami, Minneapolis. So every place is a little different, and some places aren't dealing with the issue. Dr. Maddows is in the Detroit area where there's a big issue. And so I think perhaps reaching out to even colleagues in New York City, how they've been managing some of that, but certainly we can advocate and put a statement out for guidelines for program directors to just really advocate for the fifth year integrated resident or the fellow really being kind of the last in line.
So Amy, I can hear my PGY4, PGY5 integrateds whisper in my ear going, are they fellow equivalent in terms of how we should consider them?
Well, there's certainly the fifth year, the integrated fifth year is at the level of our second year fellow and how we consider them. So it really depends on your services. And so if some hospitals are staffed with an integrated fifth year and a faculty to keep the vascular service whole, that's probably where you're at. Most services don't have the fellow and the integrated 5. So it really, again, depends on some local politics and what the needs are.
Yeah, I think we've largely addressed this. Go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry. Amy, so from your work on the SVS-EB that the SVS is often called to issue policy statements, even though we don't have a lot of data to issue them on. So I didn't really want to put you on the spot there about the program directors issuing that, because as you said, it'll be different at every different institution. But everybody needs to understand that we're kind of flying blind here and everybody's in a different situation. It's hard to make any hard and fast policy statements right now. What else you got there, Alan?
Yeah, that's a good one. How can a program director evaluate residents about virtual technical skills? Really, is it feasible to evaluate technical skills virtually? And are there any places that are doing that?
I think everybody should, I think in this, you take a breath and see what's going on. And, I think certainly virtual technical skills, it's an aspect of training. Is that the way we all train people? Of course not. Is this pandemic the same as it's been all of the training period? No, of course not. So I think you have to kind of inject some common sense into it. I think there's certainly, people can look at using virtual skills as one adjunct of training. We're not hopefully anticipating that we're going to be not doing elective surgery for 3 to 6 months. If we're going to come down that path, then we may have to sort of look at some of those sorts of things. But from what I hear from program directors around the country, including our own, we're all still doing some operating. I don't think any of us are going a week with 0 cases. We're all doing some. And so our trainees, I can just speak, who are at different hospitals, none of them have gone without doing any surgery. So I think we just all have to feel that during this period of time, if you have virtual opportunities for the trainees, great. If not, I wouldn't stress about it. I think, again, we're hoping that we can get back to really doing some elective work soon. If it's not going to happen, then maybe we have to look at some other skills. But I wouldn't fret as a program to say, my gosh, now I have to come up with all these virtual skills programs. It's something to think about as we go forward, for sure.
Well, in that regard, Alan, you've got a boot camp scheduled in about 8 weeks. Can you do that virtually?
Yeah, we've also got this, we're talking about this morning actually. We have what we call pre-intern, where we brought in, we fill this, 40 residents, 10 on the waiting list. The good news is now we can probably take those 10, and we really are talking about trying to do some of this virtually. So we'll test it out. This used to happen right before the VAM, actually after the VAM and before they started the residency program. So yeah, we're going to try and test some virtual capability in terms of skill training pretty soon. So Kim, let's deal with these two questions, then I'll kick it back to you and you can basically introduce the next speaker. We've kind of already dealt with this a little bit, and it's about how should it affect integrated residency, away rotations. I think we already talked about the interviews. Away rotations?
I think there's, those of you who deal with medical students, I have a fourth-year medical student now, or excuse me, a third-year medical student saying that his summer away rotation was canceled. So, it's something to think about. I don't know if Dawn, if you have any experience.
So I'm actively screening applications right now through VSAS, but we aren't making any firm commitments to any students. So once I vet an application and suggest I'd like that learner to join us for a rotation, the final offer comes from the university. And the language that I've heard last, if I'm not mistaken, is that the first window of time that we would consider a visiting rotator would be in July, maybe even August. But I wouldn't be surprised if that gets pushed back further. So for the students that have been reaching out to me with some guidance, I've been entirely non-committal because I don't think we fully understand what the landscape is going to be even 2 or 3 months from now.
So we've known for a long time that the key to getting people to go into vascular surgery is to get them at the medical student level and get them exposed. And I'm a little bit concerned that we may take a hit in our programs just from all of this if the medical students don't have time with us. Rabih, any comments on that?
Well, everyone is heavily impacted, and actually we have an institutional policy in place now that bans any exchanges, whether it's visiting students or observers or any of the like. There's no.
All right, we kind of lost Rabih's audio there for a minute, so let's see if we can get that back. Let's deal with one last question. Let me point this one out. This is why I asked that question, because I knew we were going to take a hit from the integrated residents. So I think we've covered that base. Last one is, why did it take a pandemic to drive a surge in the adoption of virtual solutions? What barriers have been relaxed? And if and when we return to the new normal, which of those barriers will go back up again?
Well, there's two different aspects there, Alan. One is virtual education, and I don't know that there really were all that many barriers other than our own transigence, if you want. The other is HIPAA issues, and I think we're going to be talking more about telemedicine in 2 weeks now, but there has been a relaxation of HIPAA rules that have allowed for more virtual stuff with patients. But I'm going to bounce it over to some of our other panelists for comments on why it took this long to go virtual. Gib pointed out that the VSB in their exams, the qualifying exam is pretty much high tech as it is. It hasn't been virtual, but it clearly is a computer-based exam. And so what about other platforms?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about telemedicine just for a second. So during the first three to 5 days of the pandemic here in Florida, they were like, oh, you have to use the University of Florida telemedicine platform and you have to be on campus. And then 3 to 5 days later, they were like, okay, you can take your computer off site, but you have to use the telemedicine platform. And then 3 to 5 days after that, they're like, we don't care what you use, just communicate and document. So that for me is just sort of the evolution of how telemedicine. We literally had about 50 telemedicine visits a month. This month, we're going to have over 1,000. And so the issue, I'm not a hospital administrator, even though you might think I am one. I'm not. I'm still a vascular surgeon. Is not really whether we're doing the visits, is how we're going to collect and charge and collect for them. I think that's going to have to be sorted out because you're right. HIPAA is sort of gone by the wayside in some ways. I totally agree with you, Kim.
Well, I would have to say, so when I was running vascular surgery at Penn State, we started in about 2010, 2011, doing virtual via Adobe Connect and through a HIPAA protected through your institution because people were going to outreach. And I didn't invent this idea. I would put a shout out to John Matsumura at Wisconsin, who invited me as my first visiting professor virtually, and I gave grand rounds virtually back in 2011, 12. So I think some of it has been going on for a while. We've been doing, and I think some of it's just getting that information out there, and it is HIPAA protected. We have Zoom through our own institution. So there's a lot of that out there, but I think the interviewing and all this, being forced to do that now has really pushed to the forefront what we've been talking about in other arenas for interviewing and more virtual education. I think this is going to make it stick a bit more now than what it maybe has in the past.
So interestingly, about 2 days ago or so, Alan had Bill Quinones give grand rounds virtually. It had been scheduled and he obviously wasn't able to make it under these circumstances. I tuned into that and it was pretty good, but it really wasn't the same. And I'm not sure that I would want to give up the convening of people conference format once all this is over. We actually do have some potential questions to ask our audience later about that very thing. Do they think it's really the same or a different animal? But anybody else, Rabih or Don, have experience with that?
I agree that there will be some meetings that will be well served virtually, and maybe the happy medium will declare itself after the pandemic is over, where we'll be able to transition some of them, but it won't replace really all face-to-face meetings.
I think the issue with this, Kim, is that we all have ADD, and Zoom is good for about 15 to 20 minutes. I'm not knocking this 2-hour town hall conference, but it's literally good for about 15 or 20 minutes. So I'm just going to leave it at that, and
so
Amy has to ask me back sometime.
Amy told us earlier that she's planning a 6 or 8 hour program directors meeting on Zoom. That's
I know. So people are going to slot in and out. I'm sure that's why it's great that you can on Zoom to stop your video and keep listening, go do the dishes, go do something at work. So I think, exactly. It's I think slotting in and out as you can. And I think, the happy medium is going to be found. And I think that is the thing, human interaction. And there's just stuff you can't get from Zoom and how you interact with people. And grand rounds, for instance, it's just not the same. And so, but I think we'll take some important lessons away.
So Rabih, I know that you've been doing grand rounds virtually because I talked to you the other day. You had to leave your virtual grand rounds to do that. What's the feedback you're getting on it? Is the attendance as good? Is the interaction as good?
Yes, let me share some slides before my ADD kicks in, actually. So we have been maintaining our regular conference schedule. At UPMC, and as you know, there are several platforms. Zoom, which is what we're using now, but we have been using Microsoft Teams, which
see if we can increase his audio a little bit.
You can't hear us? You can't hear me?
We're doing it on this end.
Okay. So we maintain our a weekly Teams meeting, which has been newly instituted for us to keep in touch with each other at the senior staff level. So we meet for about an hour 3 times a week for updates. But as far as the residency training, we have maintained our 3-hour Wednesday morning conference, which continues to include didactics. So sharing the presentations goes very well. Case planning, where everyone brings their cases. When you called me the other day, I was in the middle of M&M and I had just finished presenting my complication on a ruptured aneurysm. And we also have had COVID-19 update session as well as a literature review. So the way this works well is it has to be very tightly moderated by someone. For us, it's our division chief, Dr. Macaroon. And it's tightly kept, whereby you don't interject. Everyone is muted, and you use the chat option if you want to ask a question, either by chat or if you want to be given the podium. We've interestingly seen an increase on-time attendance. I guess it's easier to be available and ready at 7 a.m. when you're in bed, but that's what we've seen, at least. So it seems to work well. And how much of that we're going to keep as this pandemic ends, I don't know. We're currently discussing what to do with our end of the year graduation dinner, which is coming up. I don't know if we're, I highly doubt that this is going to go, and I don't know whether others have canceled it already or not. But June seems to be around the corner, and I don't know whether it will materialize by then. We have had, like I mentioned, the COVID-19 specific educational session. The first round was to have a literature review about what's been published so far. We have been anticipating potentially being asked to participate in the care of those patients, but also for our own education, to learn about clinical presentation, treatment option, and the outcomes of those patients. And we continue to update this information as needed. We are providing also the faculty and the trainees tutorials on PPEs and where they can be fitted for their N95 masks, and where is it that they can order the clinical test, where are the clinical care units for COVID patients, and so on and so forth. We have not been deployed yet outside our own profession, and it will be interesting to see if some programs are offering their trainees or maybe their faculty some ER or ICU related refreshers or hand-on training, if they are expected to staff those units or not. I want to also touch base about some of the SVS education offerings, existing educational online material that you're all very familiar with, which include really the VAM, VRIC, and the coding courses. You're also all very familiar with self-assessment, which everyone seems to be using more of nowadays with VSAP 4. VSAP 4 will actually be winding down and will be replaced by VSAP 5, which has an expanded vascular lab session. So VSAP is co-edited, as you know, by Amy Reed and Greg Modrell, and the new version would be in collaboration with the Society for Vascular Ultrasound. Now, new offerings that you will be seeing soon through the SBS and the Education Council will include online learning as part of the learning management system. The skills program, so the SBS will be offering skills program courses such as the PAD skills course, which is slated for February of 2021. This is not quite helpful as a virtual skill training, but obviously by then this will hopefully be over and this program will materialize. And another offering is the leadership development program for early career surgeons. The April meeting has been rescheduled because of the current pandemic. A couple of words about the learning management system, which has been in the work now for about a year or more. It will have CME and non-CME resources and is being built by the Education Committee under the leadership of Kelly Brown. It will provide a number of online learning opportunities, which include repurposed lectures from our meetings, such as the VAM, videos such as the How I Do It videos from VAM, and the video atlas that has been developed currently by the Education Committee. It will also have webinars, CME modules, and it will house the clinical practice guidelines. So where this stands now is we're currently finalizing the import of VAM 18 and 19 material into the LMS, and we are still planning for a soft release this summer, and hopefully this can be utilized by some of the trainees and faculty for their educational needs. So, like I said, a soft release. The video atlas will have modules on renal stenting, venous stenting, TOS, aortic endarterectomy, and endoleak repair, and you'll be able to access some of the repurposed VAM material. And if a virtual VAM 2020 does happen, then this material will also be repurposed into the learning management system. Now, there has been some ideas being circulated as to whether virtual skills training can be possible or not. And Dr. Smeds from St. Louis has proposed potentially having a live webcast How I Do It videos, where you have a moderator essentially comment on a live How I Do It video, and is that of a good solution or a partial solution to the current gap? I don't know. But those are some of the educational availabilities and offering that the SBS and the Education Council has been working on, and hopefully they can be utilized to supplement some of the gaps that we're experiencing. So that's all what I have for this.
So Rabih, the COVID-19 updates that you get, it sounded like it was twice a week or something like that. Does that include all of the faculty and residents and everybody, so they're kept up to date as to what's going on? And is that specific to your institution, or is it nationwide updates?
So we have two different types. We have a leadership update, which includes essentially the site chiefs. So we meet with our division head, the administrator, and all the local site leadership in vascular surgery to discuss essentially strategy, planning, vascular lab impact, how we redeploy our workforce. But the educational update, it's local and national, and that involves not just us and the trainees, but also the APPs and everyone who typically attends our conference.
Anyone else want to comment about new virtual education opportunities?
I was just going to say this is really a great opportunity in working with program directors, the SBS and the VSB in one of the products that Chris Abularaj from Hopkins has been working on, and many others before him, Jim Black, Vivian Gatton, and the V-score. And as a curriculum, living and breathing that many program directors have worked on before. And that's a great opportunity to utilize content that is on the SBS and the LMS with the videos already, and just so that I think we're all trying to get to where we don't recreate the wheel. And I think these opportunities of having some of the how I do it kind of videos already, and using that with V-score and kind of putting that all together. And sometimes that may mean redirecting learners from V-score into the LMS or different areas. But I think there's so much content we already have that it's a good opportunity to try to put that all together. And I think this is actually been a silver lining of some of all this. I think, as Gib mentioned earlier, that between the VSB, the SBS, and the APDVS, there's a lot of opportunity to kind of bring it all together. And I think V-score is one of those vehicles that can help do that.
So Amy, the curriculum that we've used is actually the V-score curriculum, and I can share this screen with you from the LMS website. But this is exactly what it will look like. And if you look here on the left-hand side, you will see that a lot of the headings are coming straight out of V-score. So we try to modify that and to keep it in line with V-score.
Yeah, and I think this same thing, we really this year for V-score or VSAT 5, and we did some of Greg and I last year with a couple years ago with VSAT 4, is really same thing, is trying to mirror V-score as far as the headings and all those sorts of things, just to keep it consistent. And I think we really hope that we can utilize V-score as this, push it out as a weekly kind of thing, hopefully in the future, that everybody is on the same kind of page, and that people can share content and that be kind of the home base for it.
I'd like to just add one thing around this remote curriculum that we're all pushing out at our institutions, because there will be some individualized nuances. And I think that the crisis that we're facing is challenging us to be resourceful with what we have. But one thing that hasn't been brought up yet that I just like to remind everybody is that every institution is feeling this right now very differently, and we're all going to kind of ebb and flow through these waves, I think, of care. There are other unique challenges that are pushed upon us all, both as faculty and as providers. And so one of the things we've tried to be really considerate about with our program is the needs of our house officers and their home challenges. And so we have many house officers with families that right now don't have childcare. We have schools out in Michigan really for the rest of the year. And sometimes single parents or two working parent households where people aren't going to be consistently available. So we've tried to really model into our programming some flexibility. I really hold the learners accountable for helping us understand what their schedules will allow, and we try to flex with that. But I do think that critical to kind of building this out has been some opportunity to check on each other, kind of a wellness check, accountability check, make sure people don't need anything. I can speak to that a little more in a bit. And we found some ways to be creative with our scheduling, and we're going to be pushing out kind of weekly some opportunities for journal clubs and educational content that maybe we wouldn't have thought about before. As an example, we're going to have a session on telemedicine for trainees, and that's not something that had previously been on our radar. So this has offered us, I think, a nice opportunity to be mindful of some educational nuances that really weren't on our radar before.
All right, great. I think Alan is going to pose some questions to our audience. Alan, are you there?
Again, if I can just remind everybody, you can text in these responses. The number's 37607, text in DeBakey, and you'll be able to participate in some of these responses. You will also be able to do it online at pollev.com/DeBakey. I think they're showing you that graphic at the moment. So the first one, the question is, that we're going to pose is, where is your practice? This is a question that was posed last week. We're kind of interested to see, if this is advanced. And so the question is, where is my practice on COVID-19 epidemic curve? No presence in my region or impact in my practice, a few cases, but minimal impact in my practice, preparing limits guided by priority protocols, full restrictions, no elective procedures. So if you could start texting that in, we'll look and see what the responses look like.
So those are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, or A, B, C, D, E?
A, B, C, D, E.
Okay.
Actually, it's interesting. I have it on mine. Yeah.
That label's not showing on the screen behind you. But...
I see that.
All righty. We'll give them just a minute to complete this. And all right, let's see what we got.
So 62% full restrictions, no elective procedures, surging cases. 33% preparing limits guided by priority protocols. Basically, nobody's functioning normally that we can see here. I want to ask the panelists what they're doing.
Sure. Why don't we work ourselves clockwise on my screen? So Amy, you'd be
we're
first.
pretty much only emergent and emergent and urgent cases. And so, we look at limb loss from acute limb ischemia risk, things that are, if there's some gray areas, we ask people to use their best judgment, but we're really trying to push that we reserve, just really for emergent things to try to preserve the PPE and N95 for those that need it.
Gib?
So I agree, urgent, emergent, but the key is to actually get people out of the hospital. So many of the operations that we're doing are patients that require amputations because we have to get our hospital down in terms of beds. So we run a 1,100 bed hospital. We stay 100, like everybody else's hospital, we stay 100% full. We have to be down below 80%. For surge capacity, and Dawn can talk a lot more about that, but we are operating on people who we need to get out of the hospital. So vascular surgery, for example, has gone from 3 rooms a day down to 2. We have not slowed down that much.
All right, next question, if you can show that. People are already voting on it. Are you experiencing shortages of personal protective equipment? So please keep voting on it. So Gib, we've basically gone from 11 CV rooms down to 3. And that's largely based upon anesthesia. We have 2 airway teams. They have full PAPRs when they're doing the intubation, but there's 1 team and they clear the operating room basically while the intubation is taking place. And so we can't start 2 rooms at one time. That same team goes from room to room to room to do the intubations. So it's we run probably, we did 2 cases this morning. But the volume is way down compared to what it was.
Yeah, we've already run out of PAPRs, and we haven't really seen the front end of the pandemic yet. So I have to think, I just like to ask everybody who's a vascular surgeon, I know that what we do is really important, but I would just say, remember your anesthesia colleagues. They are taken in the face every single case. And so we just moved to the timeout where the intubation occurs without the surgeons in the room. They're gowning and masking, as well as N95ing up. We wait 18 minutes, and then we repeat on extubation. So I think, and I know that other people have a pre-room where they get intubated and wait 18 to 21 minutes. I'm not exactly sure why 18 to 21 minutes, but nonetheless, it's going to slow the operating room. I know, Alan, down. I agree with you, down to a crawl. I think clearly the more you're engaged in the pandemic, the higher your threshold is for operating on somebody. My friend in Italy tells me that if you're over 80 years old and you come in with a life-threatening vascular emergency, you're allowed to expire. If you're over 70 with comorbidities, you are allowed to expire. So it just depends on really what amount of extremis you're in. So we have not reached that yet.
Yeah, my daughter's an anesthesia resident at UCSF. Sent me a picture from her in the COVID ICU wearing a PAPR last night. That kind of gets your attention when your kid's wearing something like that. So here we go. Yes, 61% of the countries or the vascular surgeons are experiencing shortage of personal protective equipment. 39% seems to still be in the clear. That's good to hear. We've already touched this. It'd be nice to get numbers on it. Have you been asked to provide non-vascular COVID-related care? A, yes. B, no.
Wow. Yeah, thoroughly.
All right, so we're up at 75% no, 70, 80% no. Not that many been asked to do this as yet. I suspect if we asked them in New York or Seattle, it'd probably be a different answer.
Yeah.
It's
Any comments while we continue to get these numbers coming in? I mean, we haven't experienced shortages, but there's certainly a lot more focus on here's your mask for the day. Make sure you don't lose it. SVS, you'd make a little clip that you could put on your jacket that says SVS on it. You clip your mask on there, Kim.
Great idea. You probably already got one cooking for Methodist.
Yeah, we'll sell you a few. Good price for you. All right, so not quite as, let's call it a little bit more than half say no, 45% yes. Any comments from the panel?
Yeah, the people that say yes are actually doing the work.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are actually too busy to actually respond now.
So Kim, we're an hour and a quarter. Why not kick it back to you and let the other panelists present?
Right. Sounds good. We're going to move on to Don Coleman, who's a member of the Education Committee and has been a prominent figure on the Wellness Task Force. And when people think of you, Don, they think of your work on the Wellness Task Force, and we're going to get to that. But I couldn't help but notice your academic appointment in pediatrics and communicable disease. Is that helping you out any here? And what can you tell us?
Totally misleading. I have a dry appointment with the Department of Pediatrics because of the practice that we have at Michigan. And the Department of Pediatrics goes by that very, very lengthy title. So no, it's not really affected any role of mine. All right.
Okay. Well, what you got for us?
Well, I think that we had talked about really presenting some of the wellness considerations that are particularly at the forefront now as individuals are navigating this current crisis. And I'll just kind of start by suggesting what I've seen at Michigan Medicine and what I've seen in interfacing with my colleagues in vascular surgery across the country is that everybody's feeling things very differently. I think it's important to remember that. I've seen emotions kind of visibly and directly and indirectly expressed from a lot of dear friends and colleagues and prominent leaders, I think because there is so much uncertainty. And so I wanted to start, and I don't have any slides intentionally. I wanted to start by just introducing kind of the only existing data that I could reference as it relates to wellness in this specific pandemic. A JAMA Network publication that just came out from Lai et al. Called Factors Associated with Mental Health Outcomes Among Healthcare Workers Exposed to Coronavirus Disease 2019. And this is coming out of China, essentially a cross-sectional study of 1,257 healthcare workers in 34 hospitals equipped with fever clinics or wards for patients with COVID-19 in multiple regions of China. And a considerable proportion of healthcare workers in this study reported experiencing symptoms of depression, anxiety, insomnia, and distress. And this was particularly notable and significant across gender, in that women, nurses, maybe more than physicians, those serving in Wuhan proper, and those that were qualifying themselves as frontline healthcare workers directly engaged in diagnosing, treating, or providing care to patients with suspected or confirmed COVID-19 were at highest risk. And I think that this really nicely suggests that there is going to be a predictable need for both psychological and support and interventions for especially those on the front line. But to be fair, I think many of our healthcare providers across the country right now. So it's a concept that we've been thinking about actively as a task force now committee. And I'll be honest, we were just kind of moving into our next steps as a task force to prioritize our efforts for the coming 12 months based on the responses of the challenges we were hearing from our membership. And we're going to do probably a firm 180 and flex and shift into a space that probably makes a little bit more sense right now. I also wanted to just reference a bit a concept that I think people may or may not resonate with or take anything away from today, and that's the concept of anticipatory grief. And so much of what I'm hearing from individuals that I'm interfacing with during this time, they're not sleeping. There's a lot of angst because we feel like we don't have a lot of control or power over the current situation. We're looking desperately for guidance and answers that really not there yet. We're working through this actively together. And some people are already struggling and suffering from bereavement. This is a really kind of big, heavy time for all of us. And so I wanted to just make kind of a few comments about this concept of anticipatory grief, which essentially has a definition, which is the feeling that we get about what the future holds when it's uncertain, and sometimes can center on death, but sometimes can center on, much heavier concepts. And so I think many people that I've talked with are feeling this right now. And it's important to be really intentional and thoughtful when you're interfacing with not just yourself and these thoughts, but others. And so we're all leading a lot of different teams. You're leading trainees, you're leading office staff, you're leading OR teams, and people are experiencing a lot right now. And so I think there have been a few suggestions that are good starts in trying to find balance in what you're thinking, kind of coming into the present, to focus your efforts, letting go of those things that we have no control over, staying really, really focused on what we do have some control over, to do that really effectively, to stay kind of mentally agile and very flexible, stock up on compassion, and recognizing that this is a very, very open-ended challenge that we're facing right now. I think taking away from positive experiences and things that we should celebrate, taking a lot from that when we can, I think it recharges all of us.
All right, great. Anything else for us, Dawn?
No, I mean, I probably should talk to you a little bit about what we're thinking as a task force, and I kind of had hoped to pool the audience specifically. As many people are aware, we've been working alongside professional coaches with surgeon masters to really champion not just education for our members, but a network for community and peer support, which I think is important now more than ever. And so we're looking at evolving this relationship and collaboration kind of more front and center in response to this challenge. And so right now we're exploring opportunities to bring in more of the calls. We had our first call last month, and I think we'll bring in this opportunity to offer some opportunities for wellness check-ins and coping mechanisms and peer support and community with the Surgeon Masters group. We're also looking at opportunities to respond immediately to our membership, and there have been some discussions and suggestions for even a crisis hotline. I will say that a lot of this kind of organically happens. We're seeing lots of great platforms to discussion, not just through SVS Connect, which is a really important and central source, but also in other social media forums like Twitter and Facebook. There are closed media platforms that are valuable. And then I think there are now growing threads on WhatsApp, where many surgeons from really across different countries are networking and communicating and sharing ideas. And I think that's really helpful to have that buffer of community behind you, both supporting you, helping disseminate knowledge, and also being accountable for each other.
All right, well, thanks for that information and updates. Rabih, any comments you have on any of that?
I agree and with Dawn, and thank her for all the work that the task force is doing. I'm sure a lot of places have institutional resources that they can potentially tap in this time for some potentially virtual relief. Wellness. So maybe all of us should try to explore that and make it available to our trainees.
All right, Alan, any other questions you want to ask us? Either multiple choice or text to screen?
Yeah, so if we can pull up the text to screen, let me make a comment first of all, is that many of the residents are alone. Many of the residents are away from home, especially the fellows that are only coming for a year or two. And so I worry really a lot about the support systems, particularly for the residents and fellows. Sometimes they prefer to be at work because when they're at home, not only are they remote from their families who they're worried about, but they're also isolated, in context here. So I think whatever we can do to think about how we start getting residents and fellows together, it would be a very good thing to do.
It's interesting. Go ahead, Amy.
I just want to make a quick comment. Two things. I think certainly we have to be aware that unfortunately domestic violence and harassment doesn't take a break during pandemics, and in fact some of it is highlighted and accentuated because of just what Alan said, alone time and things, abuse and things happen. So obviously being aware of signals for that. But I think the other, on a more positive note, there's a lot of, I'm joining for the third week in a row, my family on group FaceTime happy hour. And there's a lot of these kind of group activities, social things that people can do virtually, as Rabih mentioned, for certainly for the division meetings and different things, but for socially. And actually there's several on the WhatsApp that are going to try to get together on a social hour, that type of thing for vascular surgeons. So there's ways, and even though you're not seeing the person in the flesh, even having the interaction online and seeing other people is gratifying, and I think gives some positive feedback. But I think there's a lot of grief that we've lost what is our makeup, which is the day-to-day operating, being very useful, and now some of us feel very useless. So I think it's a very difficult time to kind of wade through it all.
Well, it's interesting you should bring up the social interaction element, because I've been mulling over in my own mind since Alan raised that question, is why did it take a COVID-19 epidemic to move us into the virtual world? And maybe it's a generational thing. I think a lot of us, perhaps all of us on the screen, we just kind of like getting together and seeing each other and talking and chatting and doing it in person. It's not quite the same, but we're going to make it work. And it's what we've got to work with now. So
I don't think we're on TikTok yet, but we'll get.
Yep.
I do want to respond to Alan's question,
Yeah,
though,
sure.
and I love that you asked that and brought it back to the House officers, because I do worry a lot about your comments. I'll suggest that what we are doing at a higher departmental level, so it's in part organic to our section, but now in a more structured way through our department, as we are considering broadly this concept of resident redeployment, which is really active right now. We've also built into this planning and strategy and execution the concept of having a subgroup of individuals presently led by a woman named Gurjit Sandhu, who is our Vice Chair of Resident Professional Development. She's serving as in the capacity almost of an ombudsman to help us navigate some of these challenges. There are lots of home and family concerns that are raised during this time when we think about that service. And Gurjit has built a group of core House officers alongside her as we're deciding who's redeployable, what their home circumstances look like. Sometimes those aren't comfortable things for people to talk about. And also intrinsic to this design is an opportunity for the house officers to have responsibility for each other, specifically scheduled check-ins. And I think that that's important to know that you've got individuals that have your back. I think it also is important that as our house officers are being redeployed, it is alongside other faculty and other members of our departments. They're doing this together. I think that goes a really long way. And to Amy's comment, I've thought a lot about this kind of vulnerable population of individuals who are struggling or suffering from domestic violence. I think it's a real challenge right now, and I think we're going to see more of it. Suggestions have already started in some of the press, especially coming out of Europe is what I've learned. But essentially, abuse of women and children transcends all the demographic categories that we would draw out, socioeconomic status, gender, et cetera. And Barbara Bass led a lot of work around this a few years ago when Dr. Sarah Lynn Gordon Burroughs was killed. And so I do think there are some really important, relevant organizations that can provide us guidance in this setting. I looked at some of the data that's been coming out of the National Domestic Violence Hotline's reports, suggesting that they've seen pretty steady chat and text volume, averaging 2,000 a day. But there have been increasing comments related to concerns over how COVID-19 is going to affect what that looks like at home. And so what's becoming clear now is that women specifically are using code words in a more safe space, where they're going to pharmacies in Europe and they're using a safe word or a code word expressed to a pharmacist, because that's the only way they're finding opportunities to be removed from that situation and find that support. So I would just encourage everybody that's participating in the call today to think about not just yourself, but all of our colleagues, our house officers, and our office staff during this time, and do your best to be accountable for each other. Reach out, find grace and forgiveness for folks during this really challenging time. Have courage, and I think find ways to help that may not be our normal outreach and patterns of behavior.
Well, those are sage words of advice that we could all learn from. We've had a question brought in through the Zoom chat group, Alan. It's a long question. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but essentially what it says is that we all anticipate we're going to be getting back to work somewhere around the 1st of July or so. Things are going to start settling down, and that's when it's going to be really busy catching up. And what's going to happen with the foreign medical graduates who can't get their visas to come join us in the workforce at that time? So this is going to be a big problem for a lot of institutions. I'd be interested in going around the whole panel to ask your thoughts on that. Rabih, why don't you start? Go the other direction around now.
Yeah, well, one has to anticipate delays, and you have to plan for a contingency plan, because you're not going to have foreign grads in the country on time. Even in normal circumstances, one would anticipate delays. So has to start to restructure, thinking about how to restructure your coverage if you are to start working in the summer.
Dawn, will that affect you?
Hard time hearing Rabih, and I didn't hear his question or his comment.
Okay, so the question is essentially that we all anticipate we're going to be getting back to work probably sometime in the early July region or something like that. That's also the time when we typically start out new house staff, many of whom are foreign medical graduates who may not be able to get their visas to get here. So we are going to be potentially undermanned and overworked at that time.
Yeah, that's going to be a challenge, I think, for a lot of programs. And I will be very honest that we haven't even had the luxury of thinking that far ahead yet.
Gib?
So we have a finishing fellow that we offered a job, but he needs an O1 visa. That office is shut down for 3 months. And so not only can we not finish his application and hire him, we don't know what's going to happen to him in July. And so there is an opportunity to turn this into hopefully something positive. We are under a national emergency, and we're going to use the opportunity to say, He's trained in general surgery, he's trained in vascular surgery, and we need physicians. And so there are some ways that we will hopefully work around this. I think this was specifically from Libby Weaver, and while it does say the visa is about the visa and the foreign, Libby Weaver's a chief resident at Hopkins, is going to be the vascular fellow at Florida next year. When I read this, I started thinking about all of the fellows and residents starting in July and August. And I think the anticipatory grief, I think, is what the term that Dawn used. I think that's, first of all, they're missing out. They're going to be missing all their graduation ceremonies. We're not going to have any of those. And so you're going to have done somewhere between 5 and 8 years in a program. You're going to be ending with really out any sort of celebration of your journey. And I think that's going to be really hard. And then the issue is going to be, how do you move into New York City and start as a vascular surgery fellow? I think that's going to be very hard. And I think people are going to be hesitant given and maybe it'll be cleared up by July and August, but I think these are things, like Dawn said, we haven't really addressed. I'd like to hear what other people have to say and how they anticipate we're going to be actually starting this new cohort of residents and fellows.
Anyone want to share that with Gib?
I would just say that our fellows, we switched to starting in August, and we have the current fellows will graduate in July, but I think they're all are at the end of June. And so there's concern too about celebration of their journey, the fellows' journey, for all of them. And so I was sitting here listening to you, Gib, and thinking, maybe we need more celebration when they all start. And if they're not going to get the celebration at the end of their residency training or their medical student, wherever they come to, hopefully we can have some celebration to at the kickoff in August. I think it's going to be, we don't know. And I think it will all really depend on the next month or two as to when people can start. I know one of our fellows is going to be practicing in Long Island and hasn't really been able to get out and find a place to live, and has to look at real estate online. It's upset everything. There's really nobody's left out in the education from high school graduation, college graduation. So we're kind of in sort of the uncharted waters of that.
Yeah, my take on this is I'll be happy if we're normal in January. I think that the re-emergence from this is going to be much longer, and a prolonged rollout is going to take place. And so let me mention one of the things that we did yesterday in the webcast, because we had one of our OBGYNs here, and she was fantastic. Because the questions that came up were, what do we do with a pregnant resident? And what do we do with a male resident whose wife is pregnant at home? And we don't have time to go into all of that, but some very sage advice in terms of how to manage that. And so maybe this is your fellow who was sent this message in, Amy, because it basically says, hey, what about not being expected to move to Houston, for example, and they're currently in New York and they can't really come down here to look at houses? I mean, there's some very practical issues which are typically going to be dealt with in June, and I just don't think it's going to be normal at that time. Is there a way we can help them?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now the virtual viewing of houses, rental properties, all that sort of stuff, I think is about all we can kind of do. We've been thinking, well, what happens if our fellow can't move if we're still in this in July? Is there something we can do to keep them slightly on the payroll, or can we use funds that we have to help them with that? I think there's going to be looking to some creative solutions for it. I think they're all anxious about it, because I think we're right in the period when people would be looking for housing to move for training or for a job. So I don't really have any great suggestions other than we just sort of keep trying to navigate through it and see what real estate agents can help with things, how you can look at things with virtual tours. But we're none of us are operating from any point of experience with this.
I'd like to hear Dawn talk about this because what we've suggested at the University of Florida is sort of an on-field promotion for a lot of people. And so we've got our people in our administration giving people privileges who are fellows and residents. And I know this happens a lot of times in the military. I think fellows become faculty and residents become fellows. And I think you might see a lot of that happening the longer this draws out. But I'd like to hear Dawn comment on that.
I appreciate that question. I will say the language from our GME has been really, really sharp right now, and that we are not actively promoting individuals, at least this month. Our system just flexed into ACGME Category 3 for pandemic emergency, but the language is still suggesting that for those non-ACGME approved fellowships, so for our transplant fellows as an example, they're the only ones who are able to serve in a faculty level role. All of our other house officers are still in a position where they're going to require some level of supervision with really strict compliance to clinical learning environment and duty hours. I will say though that it raises a really important consideration, as we've already in other forums talked about the concept of kind of precision education and using our milestones to vet those individuals that may be ready for an earlier promotion, not just in the field during a time of crisis. And so this may push us down that route more efficiently in a way that we're seeing virtual platforms for exchange of science and meeting execution kind of take over. And so I think there are going to be some real outcomes of this crisis that are probably good, some things that we didn't expect, and that might be one of them, but at least at Michigan right now, we're not. I will say the bigger consideration of a field grade promotion is a consideration that we're making right now with our field hospital and how we allocate more faculty than house officers in this capacity, and trying to mobilize the collective hospital workforce in a way that utilizes everybody's unique skill set and exploits the talents that we have, understanding that not everybody in the hospital is an internist and practicing inpatient medicine every day of the week. We all have something to contribute right now. And I think having leadership that can really tease that out and also empower those that are willing to help, that's really important.
Yeah, I think what you're going to hear is this, and we've talked about this in vascular surgery, but the EPAs, Amy and I have talked about this in trustable professional activities. This idea that your time in service is the only really thing that matters, other than some milestones and some clinical competencies. I think we're going to have, and hopefully this will once again, like you said, Kim, earlier, much like online learning, this will force us to actually develop entrustable professional activities such that we can check people off and they can get field promotions. I think that's they may take call with an attending backup, but that's true of any young assistant professor. We offer that for everybody. So I think this is once again going to help align us, but it will also hopefully to push us forward in terms of education of our trainees.
So Kim, there's a question here for Dawn, and it's, can you explain the ACGME levels and the need for the DIO to invoke, in case some of the audience don't know what we're talking about?
I think Dawn, you're the one that said you were at level 3 or something. Is that right?
As of yesterday. I'm going to try to pull it up online and share my screen. I didn't even know it was a thing until last week.
Okay. So while you're doing that, I'll send a question to all the panelists, basically. I'm interested in knowing what you're doing. I mean, aside from personal protective equipment and splitting your teams, what are you doing to minimize exposure of your staff, your residents and everything to COVID? Are you sending the whole team on rounds? Are you doing virtual rounds? Are you are you even having the medical students evaluate patients or anything? So what changes have you made in your routines to minimize the risk of transmission in these times? You want to start, Amy?
Yes, so like Rabih mentioned, all of our medical student activities have ceased. There's no medical students on any rotations. They're really forbidden to do that. from our faculty and team, our call for our system for vascular surgery, we have one faculty on call during the day from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. at each of the facilities, and then there's night call for the system. And so the only person who goes into the hospital during the day is the day call person, a faculty, if there's something to be seen or a consult that needs to be seen in person that you can't figure something out remotely. We use we only have a fellow right now, and so the fellow we use in the same fashion. If it's just looking at an incision or something, we do that virtually. So they take pictures that can be uploaded into Epic, and we really encourage the fellows to, if they get a consult, let's just say about a pseudoaneurysm, we say, look at if at all possible, look at the imaging and things that you have available to you virtually to avoid exposing yourself if you don't have to. And then I will say, the PPE, people get fit tested and things to use that. But, interestingly, just this morning in the hospital for fit testing, there's a big line and there's no social distancing. So it's just ridiculous. It's still, people are, we forget. And it's sort of shocking to hear. But we really try to make an effort that, what we'll do for our rounding, I'm on call this weekend, and we essentially say for the system, the people that are at the various different hospitals, if there's any inpatients to see for vascular, that they go do that, see the person and get out, and then I'll take call for the system of what's emergent and urgent and that type of thing. Again, to preserve faculty, and we keep in touch to know if people are getting sick or feel ill, that we take them out of the rotation if need be.
Okay.
Right, Dawn, were you able to pull that up?
Yeah, I'm sharing the screen right now. Sorry, I'm trying to share the screen now. Can you all see it?
It looks like stage 3 is the highest. Is that true, or?
Stage 3 is the highest. So we flexed into stage 3 pandemic emergency status yesterday. And really it was in line with Michigan medicine language that went out to everybody that works for Michigan medicine, suggesting that it was time to have all hands on deck. So it is an educational kind of self-declaration from our GME, and it can persist for about 30 days. My understanding and interfacing with our educational leadership is that by invoking this classification, while we still have to abide by those really important pillars of the learning environment, specifically adequate resources and training, that gets a bit to PPE, adequate supervision, work hour requirements, which nobody is going to necessarily flex during this time, and having fellows functioning in their core specialties. All other common program requirements and specialty-specific program requirements are suspended during the time of this declaration. And probably the biggest flex that we felt when that happened is it was the point in time when we were considering our pool of residents for redeployment into critical care and procedural capacities, that we pulled our academic development time, or our lab residents, back as house officers for the university to come in back with the pool of faculty and suggest that they also can be redeployed now during this time of crisis. And that was really supported, I think, by leadership for a few reasons. One, especially basic and translational lab efforts and clinical trial efforts have ceased because of the social distancing requirements, the fact that there's no ongoing human study activity, and we need to reserve our PPE, and we've taken donations from our lab partners at Michigan. And so research is really a bit at a standstill right now. So we're using those house officers, and then we're using their faculty. So the faculty mentors are getting pulled in some capacity to help serve right now. And so I think it's really just the highest self-declaration that it is all hands on deck. And this is the priority, at least for the very immediate future.
So Dawn, let me segue that into one of the other questions that's up here, and that's like most of the conversation about virtual meetings has been about education and clinical care. What about basic science? How can we keep the basic science going, and how, if you have labs, how do you interact with the scientists?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to defer to Upchurch on this one. I'll suggest that for our lab, we've been having virtual meetings, and we're still trying to push work forward as best we can with the data we have. But our lab is really in a shell right now of its normal form, simply to preserve the cells that we have. We're not bringing new data into the lab, and most of the work is really halted, except that which can be done remotely. So I'd love Gib's perspective on this as well.
Dawn, can you unshare your screen while Gib responds?
Yes, sorry about that.
So we have, I would say basic science research is ground to a halt in terms of doing experiments. And it's for the reasons Dawn has alluded to, saving of the PPE and decreasing the exposure. And so people are at home. What's really interesting is I got an email from one of the editors of not the JVS, but a different journal, saying the journal has been getting swamped with new submissions. And I sort of feel like as on some editorial boards that I'm getting swamped with review requests. And so what people are doing is they're doing their IRB applications, they're writing papers, they're tabulating data. I think there are going to be a host of NIH applications going in that people have had a hard time writing. So almost anything that you can do from home, that's what people are doing. I just want to warn people about the cohorting, and this is maybe just Florida, but it's I think it's everywhere. It's really important that if you're at home, you document work product. And I know we haven't really talked about that, but I'm really fearful for the workforce coming back to work. That there is going to be it can be a potential job losing period of time, and I think people really ought to document work product. I've asked my lab residents, I've asked all the people that work in my lab to document working 40 hours a week, to send me things to review, etc. But I think you have to, just like our residents when they're cohorted, are looking for educational activities on the web, doing their RVT work. I know it's RVPI now, but nonetheless, I think the lab people are doing similar things, because you have to actually, I had a lab person say that they had been working to generate a lab strain of mouse for 3 to 4 years, and those animals all had to be killed. So I think this is going to set us back fairly significant period of time in terms of our lab efforts in the United States.
Rabih, I know that the PIT program has required a couple of research years in there. How is this affecting your program?
Well, all classwork has stopped, and the same as Gib has mentioned, all basic bench work has stopped. So this is on hold. The only thing that continues is whatever you can do from home, which is clinical writing papers and mining your data. But otherwise, classwork and bench work has stopped.
Mm-hmm. The only clinical trials that they're letting go on here at the University of Florida are actually COVID-19 related clinical trials. And so once again, it's all about keeping your workforce protected. I just cannot emphasize that enough. The testing, we all know, everybody wants tests. Our residents, our fellows, our nurses, our doctors all screen for tests. But the problem with the test is that 35% of the test, it depends on whether you have symptoms or don't have symptoms. But let's just say between 30 and 35% of the time, you're going to get a false negative. And so the testing is not, and I know this has been spoken to before, the testing is not 100% fail-proof. So the key is to protect yourself, less exposure, and cover with PPE. That's what I'm telling people. Do not get into a false sense of thinking that you've had a negative COVID-19 test, because you're still at risk. And that's true for research, clinical, or education. Less exposure is the key.
So we're going to talk about telehealth in greater depth in about 2 weeks or so, but I'd be curious as to how your residents are engaging in telehealth. Are they doing outpatient follow-ups telehealth? Is that just faculty doing that? And how's that going?
I could say we haven't done a lot of the engagement of the residents yet, only because, as you know, a lot of our follow-ups require elective testing in the vascular lab. And our vascular labs and our radiology and our CT imaging are all in a similar fashion of really only urgent and emergent types of things. So getting the routine ABIs and things like that, carotid duplex, all that is on hold. There are some patients, we're seeing virtually, and we've just sort of had it hit or miss. So I think as we get further into this in a few weeks, if we're going to be having a couple of patients to see, I think pulling the residents in and encouraging them to be on that and learn how to do that will be really important. We just don't have the volume or haven't seen that because we're really just dealing with urgent emergent.
What about wound checks, incision checks? I mean, if you got a post-op carotid and you call him up and he says he's doing fine, can you get him to take a picture of his neck and send it to you? Is that enough?
We have actually. We've been using our APPs. Still have a little bit of clinic with that, and you'd be, a lot of folks, even in their 80s and 90s, still are pretty, are reasonably tech savvy. They can take pictures, so they're not always focused, but we eventually get a look at some of it. But there are still some that I know our wound care centers are dealing with. Every once in a while, there are some that we have to see in person.
All right. Well, we're going to jump back to Dr. Lumsden, who's got some multiple choice questions for us.
Yeah, to pick up on your question about virtual health, we use Epic and MyChart, and so even when we're doing virtual clinic visits, the resident can go in and actually interview the patient before we go in. So we've tried to keep it as much the typical clinical experience as you can get. I think one of the other things that we often don't talk about, telemedicine means different things to different people, and there's a huge spectrum of opportunities. We just turned on our virtual ICU a couple of days ago. I can tell you there was a lot of resistance, the clinical staff using virtual ICU. Not anymore. All of a sudden it's kind of the hottest topic in town, and it's remarkably good that we have an operations center that monitors the patient. If I want to see in the patient's room, you call the operations center, they send you a link, and you connect straight in to talk to the bedside nurse or the consultant or whoever it is that's standing beside your patient. And so that's another whole level of potentially applying telemedicine. Okay. So speaking of telemedicine, let's talk about this question. If you've participated in virtual interviews for residency or fellowship, how happy were you with that format? Our experience remote actually is that two of our PGY4s are both interviewing for cardiac surgery programs at the moment, and probably half of the residencies or the interviews have actually been virtual. They're not that happy. They feel like they don't get this opportunity to pitch themselves when they're trying to do this virtually.
Looks like it's all over the map here. So roughly you have about half that are okay with it and half that think it leaves something to be desired.
That's
not terribly surprising, but as was mentioned before, the cost savings for these resident applicants and fellow applicants is going to have to be huge. So that may be a tilting factor. What else you got, Alan?
Although if you ever ask them how much they spend, it's remarkable. They rent a bed in somebody's house, and they often travel and share things together. They actually get together in groups, so they actually will take a hotel room, for example, together. It's very resilient people in terms of trying to control the costs. If you participated in virtual grand rounds, M&M or VSAP conferences, how happy were you with the format? Same idea. Yeah, mostly happy.
Yeah, no rave reviews though.
Well, there you go. Somebody just gave you a rave review.
Yeah, I was shocked. I think ours, 2 weeks ago, was our first Department of Surgery grand rounds, and it normally has, you have the residents, and there's normally maybe about 50 to 70 people there. They had something like over 200 people online. It was like the largest attendance ever on virtual.
Do you give CME credit for those, Amy?
We don't for They don't for the, depends what we're having. If it, we have not had a virtual CME one yet. We still, though, I will tell you, we get CME for our M&M, our system-wide M&M, which we have done virtually now for 2 years. So we definitely, that's available.
So I'll throw up this other question. Have any program trainees contracted COVID-19? I mean, trainees in general.
Right. Trainees in general will be fine.
Have any of the program directors online had experience with the residents becoming positive? Good, neither have we.
No,
Okay,
that's not
so
what this survey looks like, but that's...
So the last question is, have you or any of your partners contracted COVID? I think it's the last question, Kim. After that, it's back to you.
All right.
It's a surprising number. All right, any closing comments?
Yep, I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to have to get through Gib there for a minute. All right, I think you can probably see my screen, and it looks like we're drawn to a close today, so I'd like to remind everybody about our third SVS Town Hall on COVID-19 next Friday. The official announcement will be coming, and again, this will be on financial assistance programs for practices impacted by C-19. I'd also then like to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists from today's session, and particularly Dr. Lumsden and the production team at Houston Methodist, led by Tyree Horn, second from the right there. We really appreciate their assistance in producing these first two SVS town halls, giving the SVS some time to establish our own broadcast capabilities, which we will inaugurate next Friday with the financial town hall we mentioned. Hope to see you all there, and then, meanwhile, stay safe, stay strong, and stay tuned. Thank you all.
Thank you.